who will be in the minority and thus have no say. The notion of equality to which both parties will subscribe must therefore be taken from the definition of right which is common to both. Politics, 1318a, 19-28. The objects of mathematics are not substances in any higher sense than things. They are only logically prior, not prior in being, to sensible things. Mathematical entities can in no way exist on their own. But since they cannot exist in perceivable objects either, they must therefore not exist at all, or exist in some special way which does not imply independent existence. For to exist can mean many different things. Metaphysics, 1077b, 12-17. Where natural bodies are concerned, some have life and some do not. That is to say, some are able to nourish themselves, to grow, and to decay. Thus every living natural body, which must be substance, must also be a complex substance. But since it is a body of a particular kind, that is to say, it has life, the body cannot be soul. For a body is a subject, not something predicated to a subject, and is thus matter. The soul is therefore substance in the sense that it is the form of a natural body, which potentially has life. Substance in this sense is actuality. In this way the soul is the actuality of the living body, but actuality has two senses, which are similar to the possession of knowledge and the use of knowledge. The actuality of which we are speaking is similar to the possession of knowledge, for both sleeping and waking require the presence of a soul, and waking is like the use of knowledge, whereas sleeping is similar to the possession of knowledge without using it. De Anima, 412a, 17-26. It is obvious that there are causes, and many of them. These are discovered when we begin by asking, why did this happen? This leads us back to several basic questions. When faced with unchangeable things, we are left asking, what is it? For example, in mathematics, it all comes down to the definition of a straight line, or number, or some such. Or in other cases, we might be led to ask, what brought about this change? As for instance in, why did these people go to war? The answer here could be, because of border raids. Or it could be because what the thing itself is for. In other words, they fought for dominion. In another category, where things come to be, their cause will be matter. Evidently, these are the causes. There are several different types of causes, and anyone who wishes to understand nature should know how to uncover them. In fact, there are 4 different types: matter, form, whatever brings about the change, and whatever the thing is for. Physics, 198a, 14-24. Thus motion being eternal, if there is a prime mover, it too must be eternal. And here it is sufficient to assume there is only one mover, the first to set in motion stationary things, and this being eternal will be the principle of motion for all other things. Physics, 259a, 7-14. Aristotle wrote and thought so originally about so many things that he was bound to get a few of them wrong. People whose nostrils have thick extremities are lazy, just like cattle. Those who have thick ends to their noses are insensitive, just like boars. On the other hand, people who have sharp-ended noses are easily angered, much like dogs. However, those with round, flat ends to their noses are magnanimous in the same way as lions. People with thin tips to their noses are like birds, but when their nose is hooked and juts out straight from their forehead, they are liable to shameless behavior, just like ravens. Physiognomics, 6, 28-32. Aristotle did much to establish scientific investigation and categorization. His achievements are astonishing, especially when one considers much of the current evidence and material in this field, some of which he recorded. In Arabia there is said to be a species of hyena which paralyzes its prey by its mere presence. If this hyena steps into the shadow of a man, it not only paralyzes him, but renders him completely dumb. There are 2 rivers in Euboea. The cattle that drink from the one, called Cerbes, turn white, and those that drink from the one called Neleus turn black. The river Rhenus flows in the opposite direction to other rivers, running to the north where the Germans live. In the summer its waters are navigable, but in the winter it is frozen with ice, so that the people can walk on it, like land. On Marvellous Things Heard, 145-168. For centuries, many of Aristotle's contributions to philosophy were considered sacrosanct. His truths were eternal truths which could never be denied. But the advent of modern philosophy led to the gradual discarding of Aristotelian thought. Surely his most important contribution, logic, would last forever. Then came Nietzsche, and even this was called into question. We cannot both affirm and deny the same thing. This is a subjective empirical law, nothing to do with logical necessity, only of our inability to do it. In Aristotle's view, the law of contradiction is the most certain basic principle of them all. It is the ultimate and most fundamental principle on which all demonstrative proof rests. The principles of every axiom depend upon it. Yet if this is really the case, we should perhaps examine more thoroughly what presuppositions are already involved here. Either it says something about actuality, about being, as if we already knew it from another source. That is, as if opposite attributes could not be ascribed to it. Or it means opposite attributes should not be ascribed to it, in which case logic would not be an imperative to know the truth, as formerly supposed, but merely an imperative to organize a world that we could look upon as the true one. Thus it remains an open question. Do the axioms of logic precisely match reality, or are they simply a means and method for us to create a concept of reality that suits us? As already indicated, to agree with the first question we would have to possess a previous knowledge of being, i.e. one prior to our use of and in no way involved with logic, and this is certainly not the case. The proposition, the one that forms the law of contradiction, thus involves no criteria of truth. It is simply an imperative saying what should count as true. Nietzsche, Will to Power, section 516. Logic thus becomes the morality of our way of viewing and perceiving the world, the ethics of our epistemology. To deny it is wrong, not in a factual sense, but in a moral sense. Our entire notion of truth, logical, scientific, religious, the need to tell it socially, and so forth, are thus in the same category. They are systems by which we live, which are of use and benefit to us. They are not based upon what actually happens, but upon what is useful to us and fits in with how we choose to view the world. Chronology of Aristotle's life. 384 BC. Aristotle born at Stagira on the Chalkidiki Peninsula in northern Greece. 367 BC. Enters Plato's Academy in Athens, where he remains for 20 years. 347 BC. Leaves Athens after not being appointed head of the Academy on the death of Plato, and takes up residence at the court of Hermias, of Atanius in Asia Minor. 347 BC. Marries Pythias. 344 BC. Leaves for nearby island of Lesbos, where he settles at Mytilene. 343 BC. Becomes tutor to the young Alexander the Great. 339 BC. Retires to Stagira. 335 BC. Returns to Athens and founds the Lyceum as a rival to the Academy. 323 BC. Anti-Macedonian feeling in Athens on the death of Alexander causes Aristotle to flee. He takes up residence at Chalkis on the island of Euboea. 322 BC. Dies on Euboea, aged 63. Chronology of Aristotle's era. 390 BC. Defeat of Rome by the Gauls halts Roman expansion. 380 BC. Death of comic playwright Aristophanes. 367 BC. Rule by consulship established in Rome. Death of Dionysius I, tyrant of Syracuse, and subsequent brief return of Plato to Sicily. 361 to 360 BC. Plato's third trip to Sicily. 353 BC. Death of King Mausolus, who is buried in the Mausoleum, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. 348 BC, Second Treaty between Rome and Carthage. 347 BC, death of Plato. 335 BC, Alexander the Great succeeds his father Philip II and sets out on his career of conquest. 326 BC, Alexander the Great reaches the gateway to India, his empire stretching at its farthest limit from the Adriatic to beyond the Indus. 323 BC, death of Alexander the Great and the ensuing breakup of his empire. Chronology of significant philosophical dates. 6th century BC, the beginning of Western philosophy, with Thales of Miletus. End of the 6th century BC, death of Pythagoras. 399 BC, Socrates sentenced to death in Athens. Circa 387 BC, Plato founds the Academy in Athens, the first university. 335 BC, Aristotle founds the Lyceum in Athens, a rival school to the Academy. 324 AD, Emperor Constantine moves capital of Roman Empire to Byzantium. 400 AD, St. Augustine writes his Confessions, philosophy absorbed into Christian theology. 410 AD, sack of Rome by Visigoths heralds opening of Dark Ages. 529 AD, closure of Academy in Athens by Emperor Justinian marks end of Hellenic thought. Mid-13th century, Thomas Aquinas writes his commentaries on Aristotle, era of scholasticism. 1453, fall of Byzantium to Turks, end of Byzantine Empire. 1492, Columbus reaches America, Renaissance in Florence and revival of interest in Greek learning. 1543, Copernicus publishes On the Revolution of the Celestial Orbs, proving mathematically that the earth revolves around the sun. 1633, Galileo forced by Church to recant heliocentric theory of the universe. 1641, Descartes publishes his Meditations, the start of modern philosophy. 1677, death of Spinoza allows publication of his Ethics. 1687, Newton publishes Principia, introducing concept of gravity. 1689, Locke publishes Essay Concerning Human Understanding, start of empiricism. 1710, Berkeley publishes Principles of Human Knowledge, advancing empiricism to new extremes. 1716, death of Leibniz. 1739 to 1740, Hume publishes Treatise of Human Nature, taking empiricism to its logical limits. 1781, Kant, awakened from his dogmatic slumbers by Hume, publishes Critique of Pure Reason. Great era of German metaphysics begins. 1807, Hegel publishes The Phenomenology of Mind, high point of German metaphysics. 1818, Schopenhauer publishes The World as Will and Representation, introducing Indian philosophy into German metaphysics. 1889, Nietzsche, having declared God is dead, succumbs to madness in Turin. 1921, Wittgenstein publishes Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, claiming the final solution to the problems of philosophy. 1920s, Vienna Circle propounds logical positivism. 1927, Heidegger publishes Being and Time, heralding split between analytical and continental philosophy. 1943, Sartre publishes Being and Nothingness, advancing Heidegger's thought and instigating existentialism. 1953, posthumous publication of Wittgenstein's Philosophical Investigations, high era of linguistic analysis. Substance in the sense that it is the form of a natural body which potentially has life. Substance in this sense is actuality. In this way the soul is the actuality of the living body, but actuality has two senses, which are similar to the possession of knowledge and the use of knowledge. The actuality of which we are speaking is to exist, can mean many different things. Metaphysics, 1077b, 12-17. Where natural bodies are concerned, some have life and some do not. That is to say, some are able to nourish themselves, to grow, and to decay, thus sense than things. They are only logically prior, not prior in being, to sensible things. Mathematical entities can in no way exist on their own. But since they cannot exist in perceivable objects either, they must therefore not exist at all, or exist in some special way which does not imply independent existence. For every living natural body, which must be substance, must also be a complex substance. But since it is a body of a particular kind, that is to say, it has life, the body cannot be soul. For a body is a subject, not something predicated to a subject, and is thus matter. The soul is therefore subject, who will be in the minority and thus have no say. The notion of equality to which both parties will subscribe must therefore be taken from the definition of right which is common to both. Politics, 1318a, 19-28. The objects of mathematics are not substances in any higher